Imagine watching a movie where a man literally traps a woman inside her own body against her will, just taking complete control of her life and her autonomy.
Right.
And then imagine logging onto YouTube and finding millions of people calling that same man a nice guy or like a romantic underdog and actively defending his actions. I mean, that immense cognitive dissonance is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
Yeah, it really is a phenomenal case study in like media literacy and audience manipulation.
Yeah.
So the film at the center of this is a recent horror movie called Obsession.
Which is a very fitting title, by the way.
Exactly. And it centers on this character named Bear, who fits the classic socially awkward nice guy archetype. So he has this massive crush on a woman named Nikki. And after she explicitly and repeatedly rejects him, he uses a supernatural wishing toy to literally force her to fall in love with him.
Which, I mean, the premise alone is just pure horror. The wish works, but it effectively holds Nikki hostage in her own skin, right?
Yeah, it replaces her actual personality with this magically possessed hollow shell that's just forced to be obsessed with him.
Right, but the focal point of our dive today isn't just the movie itself. It's how highly influential media critics process it. Specifically, we're unpacking a review by a massive YouTube commentator named Alex Meyers, who defended Bear to an audience of literally millions.
Right, and our mission today is to analyze the psychological and narrative mechanisms at play here. Like, how does a reviewer successfully convince an audience to root for a captor?
Yeah.
And what does this reveal about the deeply ingrained nice guy trope that, continues to permeate our cultural narratives? To understand this, we really have to look at a phenomenon known as protagonist-centered morality.
Okay, let's unpack that, because you listening right now might be wondering, how does a grown adult miss the point of a horror movie this badly? And it really starts with a setup. At the beginning of the film, Nikki's boundaries are crystal clear.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, she friend zones Bear in 7 different languages. She tells a mutual friend she sees him as a little brother. She is a fully realized person with a life, a desire to be a writer, and just firm personal boundaries.
But that complex, bounded individual is not who Alex Meyers introduces to his audience.
Yeah.
Before the magic wish even happens, Alex frames Nikki in a very deliberate, reductive way.
Right.
During a scene where Nikki accidentally drops a crystal necklace down a drain, Alex immediately brands her the crystal mommy Latina experience.
Which I have to play devil's advocate for a second here. Is it possible Alex is just using an exaggerated internet persona, leaning into edgy, meme-heavy humor for the sake of YouTube algorithm engagement rather than, maliciously trying to tear her down?
I mean, it's highly probable that algorithmic engagement is his primary motivation. The algorithm rewards punchy, polarizing labels.
Right, it always does.
However, the intent behind the joke doesn't negate its psychological effect on the audience. When you reduce a complex female character to a hypersexualized, two-dimensional caricature, a punchline, you are actively participating in algorithmic dehumanization.
Oh, wow, yeah.
You're telling the audience, this isn't a real person whose feelings matter. This is just a trope.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like he's constructing a straw man. If he shrinks Nikki down into an annoying, crystal-obsessed woman, it creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, Bear gets to look like a sympathetic, harmless victim simply by default.
Precisely. This is the groundwork for excusing terrible behavior. If the audience doesn't view Nikki as a person with agency, they won't register the horror when that agency is stripped away.
Because they've been primed to align their empathy entirely with the socially awkward protagonist.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the ultimate stress test of that empathy, which is the moment the magic wish actually takes effect. Bear makes the wish, and suddenly, the possessed fake Nikki shows up at his door.
And she's a mess.
It's total mess. The movie makes it explicitly clear that she is highly erratic. She is crying hysterically. She even digs up Bear's dead cat, confusing it for her own. She is exhibiting a severe, immediate psychological break.
And how does Bear react? Does he ask if she's okay? Does he call for medical help? No. He brings her inside and immediately begins making out with her. Keep in mind, this is someone who, hours prior, explicitly rejected him.
Right. So how does Alex Meyers analyze this deeply unsettling scene? He praises Bear. He actually calls Bear gentlemanly.
It's unbelievable.
And he notes that, quote, to his credit, Bear gave her privacy when she took off her shirt. I read that and thought, wait, are we seriously handing out medals because a guy didn't immediately assault a woman during a mental health crisis?
It's a textbook example of selective empathy. Alex's analysis operates on the assumption that the absence of immediate violent malice is the equivalent of moral goodness. He gives Bear credit for a micro-courtesy, looking away, while entirely ignoring the macro violation, which is that Bear is exploiting a vulnerable person who is clearly not in her right mind.
That defense is like watching a lawyer trying to defend a bank robber by pointing out that the robber held the door open for a lady on his way out of the vault.
Right.
Like, the minor act of politeness is being used to completely obscure the massive felony taking place.
That is a perfect analogy.
Okay.
And it highlights a fundamental misunderstanding of ethics. When someone you care about starts acting completely out of character, erratic, and distressed, the normal human response is concern for their well-being.
Obviously.
But Bear's response is transactional. He ignores the crying and the dead cat because her sudden, uncharacteristic physical affection benefits him.
And what's truly alarming is how this transactional empathy scales as the movie progresses, because the grim reality sets in. The real Nikki is trapped in a void in her own mind. The fake Nikki is a hollow shell forced to obey Bear. Yet Alex's defense of this dynamic relies heavily on altering the vocabulary of the film.
Yes, the linguistic choices in media critique are incredibly powerful. When Bear is actively having sex with this magically trapped, possessed version of Nikki.
Which, again, is non-consensual.
Exactly. A scene the film frames as non-consensual because real Nikki is trapped and fake Nikki cannot choose. Alex refers to this as them doing the devil's tango.
I want to push back on the terminology again just briefly, because on platforms like YouTube and TikTok, creators are terrified of demonetization. They constantly use substitute words, unalive instead of kill, devil's tango instead of sex. Could this just be Alex navigating platform censorship rather than intentionally minimizing assault?
That is a very fair point regarding platform mechanics. The censorship filters absolutely drive creators toward euphemisms. However, the issue isn't just the specific phrase, it's the tone and the context.
Right.
Devil's tango is a whimsical, cutesy term. When you apply a whimsical term to an act of profound violation, you are inherently whitewashing the horror. You are signaling to the audience that this act shouldn't be taken seriously.
Right. It flattens the severity completely. It tells the viewer, hey, don't worry about the fact that she has no free will. This is just a quirky plot point. And Alex takes that minimization a step further by leaning on genre comparisons.
Oh, the rom-com defense.
Yes. He defends the entire hostage situation by comparing it to a romantic comedy. He claims that every rom-com is about trying to get someone to like you and manufacturing a meet-cute.
This is where we see the dangerous bleed-over of genre conditioning. Rom-coms have spent decades conditioning audiences that boundary-breaking persistence is romantic.
Yeah, like standing outside a window with a boombox.
Exactly. We're taught that if a guy just tries hard enough, he will win the girl. Alex is misapplying that specific genre conditioning to a literal horror setting.
He even brings up boy bands. He argues that this situation isn't a big deal because women have fantasies about being kidnapped by One Direction.
Which is just a fundamental failure to distinguish between fantasy and reality. And more importantly, between consent and coercion. A meet-cute in a romantic comedy works because, eventually, both parties have the agency to choose one another.
Yes.
The magic in obsession removes that choice entirely.
And the One Direction comparison is just mathematically absurd. Daydreaming about Harry Styles as a 12-year-old does not literally strip Harry Styles of his bodily autonomy, trap him in a dark void, and force him to obey your commands.
Right, exactly.
Having a private fantasy is entirely internal. Executing a supernatural hostage situation is external violence. They are universes apart.
Exactly. Love, by its very definition, requires a self who is capable of choosing it. You cannot manufacture love by annihilating someone's free will. But Alex's analysis refuses to engage with that reality, because doing so would require him to admit that the protagonist he identifies with is actually the monster.
Which brings up a really interesting question. What happens when a reviewer's narrative, that Bear is just a confused, nice guy, collides with indisputable evidence from the film that proves otherwise? How does the brain handle that contradiction?
Well, in Alex's case, he resorts to massive crimes of omission.
Yeah, he just pretends it didn't happen.
This is the psychological mechanism of confirmation bias in its most extreme form. When presented with data that contradicts a deeply held belief, the human brain will often simply discard the data. In this review, Alex purposefully leaves out the two most crucial, damning scenes in the entire movie.
The first one is the helpline scene. Bear finds a customer service number for the supernatural toy. He calls it, and the representative explicitly asks Bear, "Do you want to cancel the wish?"
He is handed the solution on a silver platter.
Exactly. Bear has the direct opportunity to set Nikki free, and he refuses. He only asks if there is a way to make the fake Nikki, quote, less horrifying.
He is given a clear choice between her humanity and his control, and he chooses control. Alex skips this entirely, framing Bear's phone call as a desperate attempt to fix an accidental mistake rather than a conscious decision to maintain the captivity.
But the second omission is the one that really exposes the underlying psychology of the film. It's the bedroom scene. Fake Nikki is lying there. The horror of her existence briefly bubbles to the surface, and she literally begs Bear to kill her.
Yeah.
She pleads for death. And Bear's reaction, he looks offended, he scoffs and says, "What's so bad about being with me?"
That line is the thesis statement of the film. It perfectly encapsulates the pathology of entitlement.
It is chilling. He is watching someone beg for the release of death, and his only takeaway is a wounded ego. He sees himself as the victim in that interaction.
And this is why obsession is fundamentally a critique of the incel ideology. We often imagine horror villains as loud, aggressive monsters breaking down the door, you know?
Right, the guy with the machete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the film posits that the real horror is the quiet, self-proclaimed nice guy who views the friend zone as a waiting room. It's the individual who feels inherently entitled to a woman's affection simply because he exists and he desires it.
It proves that Bear never actually loved Nikki as a person. He loved the concept of Nikki that he built in his own head. Because when he is presented with the real Nikki who has boundaries versus the hollowed-out Nikki who obeys him, he gladly chooses the hollow one.
Exactly. He is entirely comfortable discarding her actual humanity as long as her physical form provides him with validation. Now, if you're a reviewer trying to argue that Bear is a sympathetic victim, you cannot include that scene.
No, it ruins the whole argument.
Leaving it out isn't just a casual oversight. It is a structural necessity for Alex's entire premise. If that scene is included, the illusion of Bear's innocence shatters.
So when a major commentator puts out a video that calls a hostage situation a meet-cute, whitewashes assault as a quirky dance, and intentionally hides the most critical evidence of the protagonist's malice, well, the internet is going to notice.
Oh, they definitely noticed.
And they did. There was massive backlash against this review. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most revealing part of this saga, the response.
It is always illuminating to see how creators handle valid criticism. Do they engage with the substance of the argument, or do they deploy defensive mechanisms to protect their ego?
And Alex definitely chose the latter.
Yeah.
He released a statement claiming that everyone simply misheard him. His defense was essentially, look, I technically called Bear a bad guy a couple times at the very end of the video, so you all just misinterpreted my nuanced take.
That is a classic deflection tactic.
Yeah.
He points to a few throwaway lines as a shield to obscure the fact that he spent the vast majority of the video enthusiastically defending the character, making excuses for his behavior, and objectifying the female lead.
Right.
A brief disclaimer at minute 19 does not magically erase the justifications made in minutes 1 through 18.
But he didn't stop at the "you misheard me" defense. He took to his Instagram story with what I can only describe as an intellectual Hail Mary.
Oh, this part.
Yeah. He screenshotted his own DM to use as proof, arguing that women are hypocrites for being angry at his review when they supposedly loved true crime podcasts about real-life serial killers.
This is a psychological maneuver known as whataboutism.
Yeah.
When confronted with a failure in their own logic, a person will pivot to attack an entirely separate issue to create a false equivalence. Instead of engaging with the valid critique, which is that he romanticized assault in a fictional film, he attacks a monolithic hive mind idea of women.
Now, to be fair to his underlying premise, the true crime genre does have a well-documented problem with romanticizing killers. We've all seen the alarming internet fandom surrounding people like Ted Bundy. So is there a kernel of truth in his comparison?
There is a kernel of truth regarding the flaws in true crime fandoms, yes. However, his comparison fundamentally fails on two fronts.
Okay.
First, the majority of true crime media is explicitly focused on the tragedy of the victim or the pathology of the killer. It is not generally framing the killer as a misunderstood nice guy who just wanted a date.
Right, exactly.
Second, and more importantly, Alex is pointing to the bad behavior of a fringe true crime audience to justify his own bad behavior as a creator.
It's incredibly intellectually dishonest. If a major true crime podcast talked about a real-life victim the way Alex talked about Nikki, if a host referred to a real assault as the devil's tango, or reduced a victim to a crystal mommy punchline, the internet would rightfully burn that podcast to the ground.
Precisely. Alex isn't genuinely interested in starting a nuanced sociological debate about media consumption and true crime ethics. He is using a stereotype to completely avoid any self-reflection about his own words.
Yeah.
It's a defensive mechanism designed to protect his ego, which, ironically, mirrors Bear protecting his ego when Nikki begs to be released.
That parallel is staggering. Both the character and the critic prioritize their own self-image over the reality of the harm being caused. So as we wrap up this analysis, what does this all mean? Why did we just spend almost 20 minutes doing a deep dive into an internet review of a horror movie? Why does this matter to you, the person listening right now?
It matters because the way we consume, discuss, and analyze fictional media acts as a societal mirror. The tropes we excuse on screen reflect exactly how we view consent, entitlement, and victimhood in the real world.
Absolutely. When a commentator with millions of followers watches a movie about a man stripping a woman of her autonomy, and his instinct is to validate the man while objectifying the woman, well, that creates a massive cultural ripple effect.
It really does.
The terrifying truth is that guys like Bear don't see themselves as villains in the real world. They genuinely believe they are the victims of a cruel society that denies them the affection they feel they have earned.
And reviews like this give that dangerous, entitled mindset a massive stamp of approval. It normalizes the insidious idea that romantic persistence is always noble, that personal boundaries are merely obstacles meant to be worn down, and that a woman's lack of interest is just a puzzle for the nice guy to solve.
It brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation. Think about how easily narratives can be warped. If our collective media literacy is so skewed that millions of people can watch a literal hostage situation, a woman trapped, terrified, and forced to perform love, and they casually label it a meet cute, we have to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question.
What subtle red flags, what boundary-crossing behaviors, and what quiet forms of entitlement are we completely ignoring in our everyday, real-life relationships, simply because the person doing it seems like a nice guy?
It's something to seriously chew on the next time you hear someone defend a character who just couldn't take no for an answer. The monsters aren't always hiding in the shadows or wearing terrifying masks. Sometimes they're just waiting patiently in the friend zone, convinced that you owe them your heart. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep your eyes open, question the narratives you're being sold, and we'll catch you on the next one.